A desperate young woman, stranded in the frozen mountains, agrees to marry a mysterious mountain man for survival, only to discover the hidden journal of the wife who vanished without a trace, inside the same cabin. The mountain road disappeared behind her almost an hour ago. Not gradually, completely. One moment, Eleanor Harper could still see the faint tracks left by the last wagon that passed through the valley. And the next, the snow swallowed everything whole. The wind screamed across the mountain pass like something alive. Her horse stumbled beneath her. "Easy, easy," she whispered through trembling lips. But fear was already spreading through her chest, faster than the cold. The storm had arrived too early. Everyone in Blackwater Ridge had warned her not to cross the mountains after October, especially alone. But Eleanor had run out of choices weeks ago. After her father's death, the bank took the family home. The town sheriff began asking questions she didn't want to answer, and the man she had once trusted with her future disappeared with every dollar she had left. So she headed west, toward rumors, toward work, toward survival. And now the mountains were trying to bury her alive. The snow thickened so heavily she could barely see the horse's ears. Then the animal suddenly reared violently. Eleanor screamed as she was thrown sideways into the frozen ground. Pain exploded through her shoulder. The horse bolted instantly into the white darkness. No! She tried to stand, but the wind knocked her sideways again. The cold hit differently now. Not sharp, heavy, like her body was slowly falling asleep. She pulled herself toward a cluster of pine trees, gasping for breath. Snow coated her hair, her eyelashes, her coat. The mountains had gone silent, except for the storm. No birds, no animals, nothing alive. Then she saw it. A faint orange glow flickering through the trees. At first she thought she imagined it, but there it was again. Firelight. A cabin. Relief nearly made her collapse. She staggered forward through waist-deep snow until the outline of the cabin emerged from the blizzard like a ghost. Small, weathered, hidden deep in the wilderness. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was inside. Eleanor pounded weakly on the wooden door. No answer. She knocked again, harder. The door slowly opened, and the man standing there looked like he belonged to the mountain itself. Tall, broad shoulders, heavy beard streaked with snow, cold gray eyes, a rifle hanging loosely in one hand. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The wind howled between them. Then his eyes dropped to the blood soaking through Eleanor's sleeve. "You're freezing," he said quietly. "Unused." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Please." Something unreadable passed across his face. Finally he stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth hit her instantly. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, leather, and something simmering over the fire. The mountain man closed the door behind her, shutting out the storm. But somehow, Eleanor suddenly felt less safe. The cabin was strangely organized. Too organized. Every object placed perfectly. Every chair aligned. Every shelf spotless. As if someone obsessed over keeping things exactly the same. Her eyes drifted toward a second cup resting beside the stove, then toward a woman's knitted shawl hanging near the fireplace. The mountain man noticed her staring. "That room stays closed," he said suddenly. Eleanor turned. At the far end of the cabin stood a heavy wooden door, secured with an iron lock. Something about it made her stomach tighten instantly. "I didn't ask," she replied carefully. "No," he said, "but you were thinking about it." Silence settled heavily between them. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm intensified. The mountain man handed her a steaming cup. "Drink." She accepted it cautiously. "What's your name?" she asked. He stared into the fire before answering. "Silas." "And you live here alone?" Another pause. Then, "Yes." But he answered too quickly. Eleanor noticed it immediately. That night the storm became violent enough to shake the cabin walls. Silas spread blankets near the fire for her. "You can leave after the storm passes." Something in his tone sounded almost rehearsed, as if he had said those words before. Eleanor barely slept. The cabin creaked constantly. Branches scraped against the roof. And sometime deep in the night, she heard it. A sound, soft, faint, almost impossible beneath the storm. A woman crying. Eleanor sat upright instantly. The sound came again, somewhere inside the cabin. Then a loud thud echoed from behind the locked door. Silence followed. Eleanor slowly turned toward the darkness at the end of the room, the locked room. And for the first time, she realized the storm outside might not be the most dangerous thing trapping her there. A woman's cry echoes from behind the locked room during the dead of night. Morning arrived gray and silent. The storm had buried the entire valley beneath several feet of snow. Eleanor stepped outside briefly and immediately understood the truth. She wasn't leaving anytime soon. The mountains had sealed them in completely. Silas chopped wood in silence near the tree line. Precise, but distant, like a man permanently listening for something behind him. When he noticed Eleanor watching, he stopped. "You shouldn't wander far." "Why?" "The mountain changes after storms." That wasn't a real answer, but before she could press further, he carried the wood inside. Throughout the day, Eleanor noticed strange details. 2 plates set automatically at dinner. A second lantern lit each evening. Fresh flowers frozen carefully near the windowsill. And every night, Silas stared at the locked room, as though waiting for it to open. Late that evening, while Silas checked traps outside, Eleanor finally gave in to curiosity. She approached the locked door slowly. The wood around the frame was scratched. Not old scratches, recent ones. Her pulse quickened. Then she noticed something else, a loose floorboard nearby. Carefully kneeling, she pried it open. Inside rested a leather journal wrapped in cloth. Dust covered the edges. Eleanor hesitated before opening it. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, do not trust Silas completely." Her breath caught instantly. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Clara, Silas's wife. The next pages described brutal winters in the mountains, isolation, loneliness, Silas changing slowly over time, becoming quieter, more paranoid, obsessed with something hidden in the forest. Then Eleanor reached an entry dated only weeks before Clara vanished. "He says something is watching the cabin at night. I thought grief had broken him until I saw the footprints myself." Another entry. "There are sounds beneath the floor after midnight." Another. "Silas nailed the cellar shut today." Then the final completed page. "If he tells anyone I disappeared during the storm, he's lying." The cabin door suddenly opened. Eleanor nearly jumped. Silas stepped inside, carrying fresh snow across the floorboards. His eyes immediately locked onto the journal in her hands. The entire room went still. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might kill her. Instead, something far worse crossed his face. Pain. Raw, exhausted pain. "You shouldn't have read that." Eleanor slowly stood. "What happened to her?" Silas looked toward the locked room, then back at the fire. "She died." "How?" Another long silence. "The mountain took her." "That's not an answer." "No," he whispered. "It's the only one I have." That night, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the journal, or the grief hidden behind Silas's eyes, because despite everything, he didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a man terrified of remembering something. Near midnight she awoke again, this time to footsteps outside the cabin, slow, crunching through deep snow. Eleanor moved toward the window carefully. A figure stood near the tree line, watching the cabin. Tall, motionless. Then the figure disappeared into the storm. Seconds later, 3 violent knocks hit the front door. Silas grabbed the rifle instantly, and for the first time, Eleanor saw genuine fear in his eyes. Someone, or something, is outside the cabin during the storm, and Silas is terrified of it. The knocking came again. 3 slow thuds against the cabin door. Not frantic, not desperate. Deliberate. Silas stood frozen beside the fireplace, gripping the rifle so tightly his knuckles turned pale beneath the firelight. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. "Who is it?" she whispered. Silas didn't answer. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too quiet. The wind outside had nearly died, leaving only the creaking timber walls and the heavy sound of breathing inside the room. Then, another knock, closer this time, as if whoever stood outside knew they were listening. Silas finally moved, slowly, carefully. He lowered the lantern flame until most of the cabin disappeared into shadow. "Stay away from the windows," he said quietly. Eleanor obeyed instantly. Something in his voice made her stomach tighten harder than the storm ever had. Silas approached the door but stopped several feet away. "Go away," he called. No response, only silence. Then footsteps circled the cabin slowly. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Eleanor turned toward the nearest window despite his warning. At first she saw nothing beyond the frost-covered glass. Then a shape passed briefly between the trees, tall, human, but wrong somehow. Its movements felt uneven, like someone limping through the snow. Silas shut every curtain immediately. "We stay inside tonight." "Who is out there?" His jaw tightened. "You don't want the answer to that." But Eleanor already did. Hours passed without sleep, returned several times during the night. Sometimes near the back wall, sometimes directly above the roof, and once directly outside Eleanor's window. By morning, exhaustion hung over the cabin like smoke. Silas stepped outside cautiously with the rifle, while Eleanor watched through the window. He stopped near the porch. The snow there had been disturbed, footprints, but not just one set, several, all circling the cabin. Eleanor stepped outside behind him. The air was brutally cold, but sunlight finally pierced through the clouds for the first time in days. Silas knelt beside the tracks. They came closer this time. Who came closer? He stood slowly. People from Black Hollow. "What's Black Hollow?" Silas stared toward the distant mountain ridge. "A mining town about 20 miles west." "You mean there are people living out here?" "Not anymore." The way he said it made her skin crawl. Later that afternoon, Eleanor pressed him harder while they repaired storm damage near the woodshed. "You think dead miners are walking around your cabin?" Silas hammered a loose board back into place. "I think winter changes people." "That isn't an answer either." "No," he muttered. "It's the truth." For the first time since arriving, Silas finally began speaking about the mountain. Years earlier, Black Hollow had been a booming silver town, built deep into the wilderness. Hundreds of miners worked beneath the mountains until a collapse buried dozens alive during winter. The town died slowly afterward. People vanished, families fled. Then came the stories, men appearing outside cabins during storms, voices in the woods, knocking at doors after midnight. Eleanor tried to remain rational, but deep down, the mountain itself already felt wrong. That evening, she returned secretly to Clara's journal. This time she found loose pages hidden in the back cover. One page contained only a map, a section of forest circled in black ink. Beside it, Clara had written, Silas goes there after every storm. Another line underneath. I followed him once. I wish I hadn't. Eleanor folded the map carefully into her coat pocket. That night, after Silas fell asleep beside the dying fire, Eleanor quietly slipped outside with a lantern. The forest swallowed sound instantly. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she followed the rough markings from Clara's map deeper into the trees. The moonlight illuminated broken branches and old animal tracks. Then she saw it. A grave, half buried beneath snow. Then another, and another. Crude wooden crosses stretched between the trees like forgotten shadows. Eleanor's breath fogged heavily as she approached the nearest marker. No names, no dates, only symbols carved into the wood. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind her. She spun around. Silas stood several feet away in the darkness. His face looked devastated. Not angry. Devastated. You shouldn't have come here. Eleanor pointed shakily toward the graves. What are these? Silas stared at them silently for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, People the mountain didn't let leave. A distant scream suddenly echoed through the trees. Human. Desperate. Close. Both of them froze. Then another scream tore through the forest. And this time, it sounded like Clara. Eleanor hears the voice of Silas's supposedly dead wife, screaming somewhere deep in the forest. The scream echoed again. Then abruptly stopped. Silence crashed over the forest, so suddenly it felt unnatural. Eleanor stared into the trees, barely breathing. That was her, she whispered. Silas looked pale beneath the moonlight. No, you heard it too. She's dead. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. The wind shifted sharply through the pines. Then came another sound. Metal scraping stone, somewhere farther uphill. Silas grabbed Eleanor's arm instantly. We're leaving. But she pulled away. What if she's alive? Silas's eyes darkened with something between fear and guilt. You don't understand what's out here. Then explain it to me. For the first time since she met him, Silas finally broke. His voice cracked, low and rough. Because I left her there. The confession hung frozen between them. Eleanor's heart stopped. Silas looked toward the mountains as though seeing another winter entirely. She followed me to Black Hollow during the storm last year. I told her to stay at the cabin, but she didn't listen. What happened? The mine collapsed again. Eleanor's chest tightened. You left her? I went back for help. His voice turned hollow. But when I returned, she was gone. The guilt in his eyes was unbearable now. Not the guilt of murder, the guilt of survival. Before Eleanor could answer, another scream echoed from above the ridge. This time, much closer. Silas cursed under his breath. She's near the mine. You said she was dead. I said that because nobody survives a winter out there. Then he started climbing uphill through the snow. Eleanor followed. The journey toward Black Hollow felt like walking into another world. Abandoned buildings emerged slowly through the trees. Collapsed roofs, broken wagons, mining carts frozen beneath snowdrifts. The ghost town sat buried beneath ice and silence. Moonlight illuminated the entrance to the mine ahead. Darkness yawned inside like an open grave. Then Eleanor saw movement. A woman standing near the entrance, thin, pale, wrapped in torn winter blankets, her face hidden beneath tangled hair. Clara, Silas whispered. The woman looked up slowly. For one impossible second, hope filled his face. Then Eleanor saw the horror in his eyes. The woman smiled, but it wasn't Clara. Not fully. Her skin looked gray from frostbite, her eyes hollow with starvation and madness. Behind her, more figures slowly emerged from the darkness inside the mine. Men, women, survivors. Or what remained of them. Eleanor realized the truth with sudden terror. The miners hadn't all died. Some had survived underground through the winter, and isolation had destroyed them. The woman stepped forward shakily. "You left us there," she whispered. Silas raised the rifle carefully. "We brought supplies before the second storm. You stopped coming." Her voice cracked violently. "We waited for months." More figures emerged behind her now, dozens, watching silently from the mine entrance. Eleanor's blood ran cold. These weren't ghosts. They were starving people abandoned by the mountain and forgotten by the world. Then Clara appeared behind them. Alive. Thin and exhausted, but alive. Silas. He nearly dropped the rifle. Eleanor watched the man beside her completely fall apart. Tears filled his eyes instantly. But Clara's expression carried no warmth. Only pain. "You left me." Silas stepped forward carefully. "I came back. Too late." The starving survivors began moving closer, slowly surrounding them. Clara looked toward Eleanor. "You should leave this mountain while you still can." Then one of the miners lunged suddenly toward Silas with a pickaxe. Chaos exploded instantly. The abandoned survivors attacked, as Eleanor realized the mountain's true horror was never supernatural at all. The attack came fast, too fast. Silas fired the rifle once into the air, the deafening blast echoing across Black Hollow. For a split second, everyone froze. Snow swirled violently between the ruined buildings, while terrified breathing filled the silence. Then, panic erupted. Several starving miners rushed forward anyway, not out of rage, desperation. Eleanor saw it clearly now. These weren't monsters. They were broken human beings trying to survive another winter the mountain never intended them to survive. Silas grabbed Eleanor's hand. "Run!" They sprinted through the abandoned town as footsteps thundered behind them. A lantern shattered somewhere nearby. Glass exploded across the snow. Clara shouted after them, "Stop!" But whether she meant to help them or warn them, Eleanor couldn't tell. The storm returned suddenly with brutal force, swallowing visibility almost instantly. Silas pulled Eleanor into an abandoned supply building, just as several figures disappeared into the white chaos outside. Both of them collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. Eleanor's hands trembled violently. "You knew they were alive." Silas looked shattered. "I thought they were dead by spring, but you stopped searching." Pain flooded his face. "I ran out of food, supplies, people willing to help." His voice cracked harder now. "And after months passed, I convinced myself nobody could survive out here that long." The truth hurt, because Eleanor understood it. The mountain forced impossible choices onto people, and survival always demanded a price. Outside, the storm screamed across Black Hollow. Then soft footsteps approached the building. Silas raised the rifle again, but this time Clara stepped through the doorway alone. The lantern light revealed just how badly winter had damaged her. Her cheeks hollow, her hands scarred from frostbite, but her eyes remained painfully human. Silas stared at her like a man seeing a ghost. Clara looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You buried graves for us. I thought it would help me live with it." She nodded slowly. "I know." Silence filled the room. Years of grief sat between them, heavier than the storm outside. Finally, Eleanor asked the question neither of them wanted answered. "Why didn't you come back to the cabin?" Clara looked toward the blizzard outside. "Because people needed me down there." She explained how several miners survived after the collapse by sealing sections of the tunnels and rationing supplies. But sickness, starvation, and isolation slowly destroyed them. Some lost their minds completely. Others became violent. Clara stayed because she couldn't abandon the few who still had hope. Even after hope became almost meaningless, Silas lowered the rifle slowly. Tears filled his eyes again. "I never stopped looking for you." "Yes, you did," Clara whispered. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. Outside, angry voices echoed through the storm again. The miners were searching nearby. Clara looked toward Eleanor. They blamed him for everything now. "Do you?" Clara hesitated. Then quietly, "I blamed him for a long time." Another painful silence followed. But surviving this mountain changes how you see people. The storm intensified harder than before, rattling the old building. One of the support beams cracked loudly overhead. Eleanor realized the structure might collapse any minute. "We need to move." Clara nodded. "There's an old ranger station east of the valley. If we leave now, we might reach it before dawn." "Might?" Eleanor asked nervously. "No one crosses this mountain safely during a whiteout." The journey through the storm became pure survival. Wind screamed across the valley so violently they could barely stand upright. Snow blinded them within seconds. Several times, Eleanor lost sight of both Clara and Silas entirely. Then disaster struck. A section of frozen ground collapsed beneath Clara near an icy ravine. Silas lunged instantly and caught her hand before she disappeared into the darkness below. For several terrifying seconds, he struggled to hold her against the weight of snow and ice. Eleanor grabbed his arm desperately. The mountain groaned around them. Cracks spread through the frozen ledge. Silas looked directly into Clara's eyes, and for the first time all story, the fear between them disappeared. Only love remained. Raw, broken, human. "You have to let me go," Clara whispered. "No. If this ice breaks, all three of us die." Tears froze against Silas's beard. "I already lost you once." Clara smiled faintly despite the storm. "You never lost me." The ice beneath them cracked again violently. Eleanor screamed. Clara looked toward her softly. "Get him off this mountain." Then Clara released her grip. Silas shouted her name as she vanished into the white darkness below. The storm swallowed everything. For several seconds, neither of them moved, neither breathed. The mountain itself seemed silent. Then Eleanor pulled Silas away, just as the ledge collapsed completely behind them. By sunrise, the storm finally ended. The ranger station appeared through the trees like a miracle. Exhausted, beyond words, Eleanor and Silas stood overlooking the endless snow-covered wilderness behind them. The mountain looked peaceful again, as if none of it had ever happened. Weeks later, after rescue teams reached the valley, Black Hollow was officially abandoned forever. Most of the surviving miners refused to leave the mountains. Some vanished deeper into the wilderness. Others were never found. But people in nearby towns still tell stories during heavy winter storms. Stories about knocking at cabin doors after midnight. Stories about figures walking through blizzards. Stories about a woman's voice calling through the snow. And every winter, Silas leaves fresh flowers beside the mountainside where Clara disappeared. Not because he believes she's still alive, but because loving someone means carrying them even after the storm takes everything else. As for Eleanor, she never left the mountains either, because somewhere between the loneliness, the terror, and the brutal silence of winter, she discovered something unexpected. Not all lost people are trying to be found. Some are simply searching for a place where their broken pieces finally belong.